First Wednesday of the year 2024, and we're here at the High Mountain Presbyterian Church and preparing to begin another installment in our study. And I'm just realizing we don't have classes.
Okay, well, that's a problem. Oh, well, hello, people. I think there's only one people on there, but I don't know who might be listening in. Yeah. So they picked up your call.
Do you think it's 52 we're doing? Does 52 sound right?
50, I
52?
have 53, so I guess we did 52, or
Okay.
I think. It's been so long, it's hard to remember. But I believe it's Isaiah 53. And we'll see what.
Okay.
I have Isaiah 50, chapter 53. Is that
Yeah, I
right?
think that's it.
Okay, yep. So we're back to Isaiah after all this time. I guess Isaiah has waited for us. Huh?
Yeah, you think he's changed his approach?
Probably not.
We love him sometimes.
Yeah.
Just like his idea of God. God loves us sometimes.
Colette is there.
Hello, Colette.
Good morning.
Hi. I was trying to get in for quite a while, but I was in last night.
Yeah, but and I also was late starting, so I had left the iPad at home. So I'm glad you're here now. Barbara's here.
Yep.
Debbie's here in person. And those of you who watch online, welcome. Glad to have you here too. You always remain somewhat anonymous, but that's okay. If you want to chime in, just please send an email to revlouis@aol.com. And it actually will pop up right here, right now, and we can respond to your questions or comments. I think we've agreed that we are reading Isaiah 53, is that right?
Yes.
Is that what we decided? Okay. All right. So,
I guess I'm elected as reader,
yes,
so
you be the reader.
surely will.
Let me make sure we keep this close enough here
Oh,
so you can.
okay. Isaiah chapter 53. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. The oppression and judgment he was taken, by oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors.
Okay.
Well, obvious thoughts jump to who?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say when I was reading this earlier this week, I think it's sometimes hard to immerse ourselves in classical theology. They have a phrase called the Sitzenleben, which in German means the situation of life. And the Sitzenleben for Isaiah and his people, it's important, really important to remember that a big portion of their religious life is attending a huge gathering of the people, and in that gathering, a lamb was taken, and it was murdered. It was executed right in front of them all. So they have this sense of the innocent, the innocence of a lamb, and I don't know if you've ever seen a lamb, but they are the picture of innocence. They're like a puppy. It's like trying to imagine sacrificing a puppy. Yeah, it's a brutal thing that they have grown accustomed to. And this death of a lamb, and then, you can imagine the child asking, why? Why does this innocent one have to die? And there's deeply rooted this idea of the transference of the guilt or the brokenness of the people to this lamb. And that the death of this lamb, especially the innocent death of the lamb, makes a way. I can't say, I'm not in this situation, so I can't fully embrace it. I can't. And there's plenty of Christians who talk a lot about the death of Jesus was a sacrifice for my sin. I've never fully been able to embrace how that works or what that means. I just can't. There are lots of other ways of understanding the life and death of Jesus, and I prefer most of the other ones. But there certainly are plenty of places in the New Testament where they use this image of the death of an innocent lamb to understand the death of Jesus on the cross, which I get it. From their situation in life, they look and they see, oh, we've seen this before. Now, the part that is a minor theme in contemporary understanding was a major theme in Isaiah's life, and that is this. Let's see if I can even figure out how to put it together. The lamb in Isaiah's reading is the whole of the people of Israel. So that the faithful followers of Yahweh are on this earth like an innocent lamb, like one innocent lamb. And they use the pronoun he to refer to the whole community of the faithful. So in the language that's very familiar to us, when they say he was oppressed, he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before it shears is silent, he did not open his mouth. Now, there are traditions within the Hebrew scholars who say they're talking about Moses, because Moses was also a man who suffered greatly, but it wasn't a big stream of interpretation. There are others who were thought of to be this person, people who had suffered in life, King Josiah and others. But by and large, there was an interpretation of Isaiah that believes that Isaiah was talking about the people as a whole. that you remember I said that a big theme was that God called the children of Abraham and Sarah to be a blessing to the families of the earth. In this development, and it's a new development theologically in Isaiah, the blessing that the followers of God bring to the earth is that they become the suffering servant. They become the ones who suffer for the blessing of all. And again, you have to put yourself in the situation of the idea that this lamb dies for all the sins of the people for a whole year, but that now the application has been placed at the experience of the incredible suffering of the children of Abraham and Sarah. That they are suffering, and it goes to that question of why. Why? Why is this happening? And so what's offered here in Isaiah is he was oppressed, he was afflicted, and I'll change it to the people have been oppressed, they have been afflicted, they did not open their mouth, but they have been like a lamb led to the slaughter, like a sheep, so that they did not open their mouth. By a perversion of justice, they have been taken away. Who could have imagined their future? For they were cut off from the land of the living, stricken for the transgressions of the people. They made their grave with the wicked. And then it goes on to say, but yet it was the will of God to crush them with pain. And there's where it really gets hard in terms of our way of thinking. When you make their life an offering for sin, and they shall see their offspring. In other words, they're going to die in this crushing experience of life, but they will live on through their children. They will see their offspring, and their lives will not end. And their days shall be prolonged because of the will of God. They will prosper. And out of their anguish, we shall see light. We shall find satisfaction through their knowledge. The righteous ones, my people, my servant, shall make many righteous, and they, the people, shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will grant them a portion with the great, and they shall divide the spoil with the strong, because they have poured out themselves unto death, and they were numbered with transgressors. Yet they bore the sins of many and made intercession for the transgressors. Now, as I'm reading that, it occurs to me that there is a lot of room for misunderstanding. In some of the dumber theories about the Holocaust, and I say dumber because I think it was not ever the Jewish people that applied it, but Christians applied it to think that this is one of the reasons why there were a tradition that the Jewish people did not fight back, that they did not rise up against the Third Reich. And the reason they didn't is they were being groomed by these kinds of passages that say, by their suffering, the whole world would be saved.
I'm not buying that.
Yeah, no, and Debbie just said she's not buying that. I don't think, especially today, Jewish scholars do not buy that. And also, there was a movie that lifted up the little-known fact that there was Jewish resistance.
Absolutely.
There was massive Jewish resistance that
And
went
then
on.
look at all the other countries that kind of folded overnight too.
Right.
Could we apply the same thing to them? I mean, it happened. There was resistance all across the board, but not enough to overwhelm the Nazi occupation. So to put it, to look back to the Bible and say,
Yeah.
we understand, that these people had a certain mindset
Right,
that
they
would
were
make
trained
them
in
vulnerable.
passivity.
Yeah, it sounds kind of ludicrous to me, but.
Yeah, and it's like one of those things that emerges, and it has a ring to it of what might be a truth, and so people just go, oh, okay. I mean, it downplays the entire, the whole world being duped by the Third Reich, in terms of no one could actually believe that someone was going to
That
do
bad.
what they did. I mean, that's part of it.
Yep.
Is that there was a sense of, okay, we don't really know what's happening. We don't really know where these trains are going. We don't know what is really happening. And so by the time it was known, it was too late.
Right. I mean, how bad could one guy be?
Exactly.
We'll give him a
And
break.
who in their right mind would ever imagine that a Holocaust like that, intentionally trying to exterminate a whole race of people? Now, it had happened in the past,
Exactly.
but not in modern industrial society.
And that's where sometimes if you go back to scripture, if you're interpreting it, with in a modern frame of mind and looking back and not knowing the context of where the scripture emerged from, it can be problematic.
Right. Yeah, and I offer all of this only to flesh out my frustration with the one-dimensional interpretation of the Hebrew Scriptures that Christians were exposed to. Pastors were taking passages like this and saying, look, how could it be more clear? This is Jesus. And then, therefore, making Jewish people dumber than ever. Because how dumb could the Jewish people be? They had the story of Jesus right here in this text, and they didn't recognize him. They didn't see him. They didn't believe him. And so it became part of a way in which there's a reading of the New Testament that really reinforces anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Just really reinforces it. And just makes Jewish people out to be, blind entirely to God, and yet they were the ones who had the first shot at understanding who God really was.
And exceptional in that case. And they are not exceptional in making sacrifices to get better days.
Right.
It was common all across the world. I mean, the Joseph Campbell books show how many cultures predating the Hebrews you made a sacrifice to get, a better crop, more sons and daughters, victory in war. That happened all the time in the ancient world. And we still do it today, but we do it, we sacrifice different things, but...
Well, even the best of psychologists today will teach you that maturity, human maturity, is delay of gratification, which means that you're able to put off your immediate goal or your immediate desire for something else, and that you can delay that down the road. And it's not quite the same as sacrifice, but it is.
Yeah.
It's the willingness to give up what you might grab for today in the hope that what you get tomorrow will be multiplied.
It's kind of the Lent. I mean,
It's
it's present in all of the three, Abrahamic faiths in one way or another. And I would think that Christians should understand it as Lent. Give something up so that you can welcome the blessing, of Easter. Yes? I don't know.
No, I think it's true. And
Yeah.
even a little bit that I know about the Eastern mystic religions, that there's an awful lot that says, if you give up what you see immediately, the instant pleasures of life, you deny yourself those things, then ultimately in the end, the deeper pleasures that sustain you in life will come. Now, again, that's a long way from sacrifice your child,
Right.
So that God will bless you with future children. Although, the thinking of the Hebrew people went to that. They were influenced by the other religions that were around them, which practiced not just lamb sacrifice, but child sacrifice.
Abraham taking his son up on the
That's
mountain.
right.
And
there are people still today. I have never been okay really thinking about this idea that God told Abraham to take Isaac up on the mountain and slice his throat. I mean, so I think I've told you this before. My Hebrew teacher and professor, Old Testament, said that we misunderstand how that story was supposed to function. That there were Hebrew people who were sacrificing their children and saying it was because God told them to. Now, when Abraham heard the voice of God telling him to do it, he took Isaac up on the mountain, but in a really important moment, the angel of the Lord stopped the hand of Abraham and said, "Do not do this." And so the story is to function in a kind of a reverse explosive idea, which is, this is not how God wants you to relate to God. And so in place of the child dying, a lamb comes
Again,
in.
poor lamb.
Yeah, the poor lamb. But there were others then who theorized that the whole sacrificial system was to stop the burning desire of human beings to sacrifice, to cause death, to cause blood to flow, in order to somehow create, that big word, propitiation, to somehow create a cleansing for the human experience. All of this later comes out when the later prophets say, you never figured it out, that all of that sacrificing and all of that bloodletting and all of that, that was never for God. That was for you. That was to appease your bloodthirsty minds.
Well, and it almost says that you don't have any faith in God, that you would be upheld. And what, I mean, is your prayer not enough? Why do you have to do some kind of mumbo jumbo? But
yeah, and is God, like the psalmist says, that God is, it's not just us pursuing God. It is that God searches us out. That God is fully involved in the relationship, and I think it comes at the thing that we try very hard to weed out from theology, and that's the transactional analysis of a relationship with God. God will bless me if I do this.
Right.
God will be my friend if I do this.
Right.
But that there are whole sections, especially of the minor prophets, we'll get there, who say, like Micah, the Lord has shown you what the Lord requires of you.
Right.
You know, it isn't something you do for me, it's do justice. Be kind to one another.
In a way, it could be sacrificial, but
Well,
it's
yeah,
not. It's not taking your kid and.
Yeah, there are some people that's sacrificial for me to be kind to.
This is true. No.
Sorry. And everybody who laughed knows what I'm talking about.
Exactly. I kind of try to understand now, because in the
We know
Quran,
what you mean.
Yes.
in the Quran,
Been there, done that.
Yeah.
Ibrahim takes his son because he really believes that God has told him to do that. So I can accept that to a point. But then he really believes that God said, no, that is not what I want.
Right.
Yeah, and shows him a different way. So that's the point of the story, not the fact that I'll do maybe you feel like you should do anything you think God is telling you to do. But when you get the chance, God should be able to help you show the way. That probably isn't a good thing to do.
Yeah, and in French philosophy and in German philosophy, Kierkegaard made a really big deal out of this, exploring this behavior of the obedience of Abraham, even unto death of his son. I'm not there. I think that, again, it's an illustration of how many times the Bible shows us that people can be convinced that God is telling them to do something.
Yeah.
But that in the end, they are, what is the outstanding character of Abraham, I think is what we've already said, is that when the moment came, Abraham heard God say no. Heard God say, no, I know, do not do this. And again, going back to Tom McDaniel, my Old Testament professor, who said that was the purpose of the account. The purpose of the account was to say, I think that's, can you guys hear that static on your end?
Yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah, you're clear.
I think it's that microphone battery
That
going
one?
dead. So
Oh.
if you get to the point where you can't hear, just put your hand up and.
I'll let you know.
All right, good. But the idea, it was life-changing for me. absolutely life-changing for me to realize that woven into the story of the Bible is this pleading of God to stop being convinced always that what you think God is saying is what God is actually saying. And Micah says the way to evaluate it is this: have you not understood what I want from you? You know, to love justice on this earth, to walk with humility, and what's the other one? Love kindness, love
God,
walk humbly with your
walk humbly
God.
with your God.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what Micah and the other prophets do is mind-blowing, because they look at the whole sacrificial system entirely and they say, it's pretty graphic. The smoke of your sacrifices is a stench in the nostrils of God. Like, what? What in the world? Like, what are we supposed to do about that?
And I can see the merchants who raise animals for sacrifice being the first to say, oh, don't listen to that prophet.
Oh, now you're messing with the economy.
Exactly.
now you're messing with the market. And you've allowed religion to move into the market and somehow offer a critique of the market. Yeah.
It gets to be, on human terms, and lots of times we think about economy and what's best for us and tradition. We've always done it this way. Who's to say? Who gave you the authority? You need a lot of discernment to be a follower of God. Because it's hard to understand who's speaking the truth and who's maybe got an ulterior motive in mind.
Yeah, I mean, evangelical Christianity, and I don't know how else to group it up, has a construct. They have a clear construct that interprets this passage. This was Jesus. Jesus' death on the cross was the penalty that is to be paid to God for a human sin, and that you must release that blessing to yourself. You must receive the salvation of God in Jesus Christ. You have to appropriate his saving grace. Although there are some Christians, but not in the evangelical community, who believe that Jesus' sacrifice was once for all, whether you accept it or believe it or not. It's a universal salvation. Okay. But it still comes out of this idea, a construct that develops very late in religious history. I'm talking about 14th and 15th and 16th century. This way of understanding Jesus and Christianity is a tight construct. And so when you come along now and you try to invite people to come back and read the text and ask themselves, is it unanimously supported in the text? And they discover the answer is no, it is not. Then you get a lot of anxiety, because now people don't know what to believe. I think I've told you the story lovingly of my now deceased ex-mother-in-law, who told me that she wasn't going to come to Bible study anymore because she's heard the best Bible teachers in the world and never heard anybody teach the things that I teach out of the Bible. So that was the end of that. That was the beginning of the end. And, she was, but what's interesting is she kept coming. She kept coming, and she was still intrigued by what I just would try to open the book and say, look at this, understand this. Like this passage of Isaiah. This is the most overwrought passage trying to argue for who is Jesus and how are we to understand Jesus on the cross. And truthfully, I don't believe there's even a whiff, not even a nuance of the life of Jesus here as a prophecy. That's the other thing that is very much a part of conservative evangelical theology, idea that the Bible is a fortune-telling book. So here is Isaiah, the fortune teller, describing, as he looks down the ages, describing a work that God is going to do in the first century, and that is that a Savior, a Messiah is going to come, that's going to suffer. He's not going to complain. and his suffering will be a perfect suffering, and therefore he will wipe out all the sin. For those, and this is the stinger that comes around, for those who accept it.
Right.
If you don't accept it,
Then you're still on
yeah,
the
if you
hook.
don't accept it, then you're trying to, win your own way to God, and there's a special
That's
section
why.
of hell for you, because you wouldn't even take the
I'm
gift
laughing,
that was
it's not
given.
funny. It's not funny really when you think that
It's
people
not.
do really
Yeah.
truly believe that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. I mean, in Islam, you stand in front of God, you yourself, you are responsible for what you have done. And nobody's there as an intercessor for
Right.
you. So
So does
maybe,
anybody pass the test?
we're told that, yes, people do. And God is merciful, you know. Each surah starts with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, has mercy and abundance of, good things. So
Does that mercy extend enough to be able to cover my bad attitude?
sure it
And
does.
that I'm defiant? And
If you truly want to repent of your sins and you're trying and your intention is to do better, even if you continue to do bad, you also stand well if you keep trying.
right.
You don't say, I can't do the right thing every time. If you're still striving to try and do right by your fellow humans and by God, then it's up to God. But yeah, we're told there are people that pass the test.
Can you wait till 5 minutes before you die?
Yes, you can. Now, isn't this funny? Because that actually it does say you can repent right up to the very end of your life. The only person that's mentioned that tried that, and it was too late, the very last seconds, was Pharaoh. When he was crossing and the water was coming, and he said, oh, okay, now I believe it's too late for you. That was the only one we were told was too late. And I think
Hedging his bets.
I actually think that's an encouraging story, because it's almost, to the very last second.
Yeah.
You can try better. God has not lost connection with you. Keep trying.
Well, then there's an interesting, C.S. Lewis is not famous for his systematic theologies, but he's got some concepts that came to him in his life. And one is that really defiant people to God will be defiant even in the midst of eternal punishment. They will still be. And he didn't have fire and all that. He just said that, hell, our concept of hell was going to be in absolute isolation. And that if you met these people in this place that they go to, and you walked up to them and you asked them about regret, they have no regrets. They instead are walking further away from everybody else. They're continuing to embrace this isolation, this alone place. And I don't know, I think, he's trying to soften the idea of a God who's up there, with a punishing stick, and beating. But no, you don't need to. You don't need to.
You punish
People
yourself
will punish
that way.
themselves.
Yeah.
They will punish themselves.
You're living your hell right here on
yeah,
earth.
they do it. They punish themselves right here, right now. I'm working with a family right now. They're not part of this area, but a family I came to know, and so they reach out to me, and they have a son who is drinking himself to death, literally drinking himself to death, and he's got 3 children, 3 beautiful children. He's developed, what's that French sounding, something bar?
Guillaume Bar.
Guillain-Barré.
He got Guillain-Barré and almost died, inability to move. They rehabbed him back, and they told him, you got to stop drinking. And he's decided, it's really interesting, he's decided they're wrong. They're wrong. There is nothing wrong with his excessive drinking, and that is not what's causing the problems, and he's going to drink because he enjoys it. So now his doctor has notified him that his liver is about, 10 days from giving out. And what does he do? He says the doctor doesn't know what he's talking about.
Happy New Year.
Yep.
Let's toast
So,
to that.
but if we have this concept of hell is something that God brings to us as a punishment, or is this idea of to be careful in life because you may end up enjoying the worst punishment. You may bring it upon yourself from some broken place deep inside you. I don't, there's so many different ways of seeing and understanding this lesson, that there are consequences to how we live, both good and bad. And for Micah says there's really good consequences from working on being humble and working on it. Chip away at the arrogant attitude that develops in you as a human being. And then, just as God is merciful and full of grace, so you be merciful and full of grace. And then, the fundamentalists come along and they say, oh, see, you're trying to save yourself. You reject the salvation of Jesus. You're trying to save yourself. And that was, the Protestant Reformation was a stinging critique of the Roman Catholic tradition, which they believed that the Roman bishops and priests had developed all kinds of steps of ways that you could save yourself.
Right, and they mostly involved money or land
Yes,
or some other, something
yes.
of worth that
Isn't
you
that
could give to the
interesting?
priest.
You could spring your relatives out of purgatory. You could,
Well,
buy your entrance, your seat in the sanctuary, so that you could have the elements of the sacrament. So the Protestants made hay out of the idea that there's nothing that you can do. Nothing you can do. That it all comes down to faith. And faith is a gift, it's not a work. It's something that you have, but you have it as a gift. You're removed entirely from any credit for being a believer. And the problem is, it generated then a whole tradition of Christianity of do-nothingers. Do-nothingers, like nothing. Nothing. Towns in the United States, towns and cities filled with big churches on every corner. Meanwhile, the poor get poorer, the hungry are starving, the injustice in the courts rages out of control, because the people of faith, they're happy and content in their pew because they're saved. They're saved. And that's all there is to it. I'm saved. Now, that trend has changed. And the Christian church across the board is no longer, teaching or preaching that. You have even the most conservative theological communities are involved in mission. They go out, not conversion mission, but social justice mission.
Really?
Engaging. And that's a big and welcome trend to me.
Absolutely.
I mean, there still are the college that I went to when I was a freshman was a very evangelical, Save the World college. I lasted about a semester there. But they sent teams of teenagers to Florida, to the beach, to walk up and down the beach, not in bathing suits, but in their full dress clothes, and to witness to Jesus and to having faith in Jesus Christ to teenagers who were there for spring break.
Yeah, well.
Can you imagine?
No.
Can you imagine? What a mission.
Yeah.
And when they were laughed at and they were mocked and they saw that all only as a sign that they were doing exactly what God wanted them to do.
Yeah, well, I think that's not just evangelical Christians. A lot of,
Right. It becomes an arm of almost every religion, right? That's the Hare Krishnas who would confront you at the airport. And people who would say, well, isn't that embarrassing? You go, yes, well, that's the cost of discipleship.
Right.
Just embarrass yourself.
Okay. But really, how much success were you hoping for at spring break on the beach?
Of all
in
places.
a suit?
Right? Yeah, of all places. Walking up and down the beach in your suit.
Kids who have struggled to get through a semester, and then finally, yay, we can let loose. And what? You want me to what? Go home? No.
But I can also remember deeply the impression on my brain. When I was born in Lambertville, New Jersey, and lived there for 8 years. We lived on the corner, and we lived upstairs from the church. And I can remember, I don't know what the season was that sent him out on the sidewalk, but my father would go out on the street corner, and he would get up on you. They call it a soapbox. But he would get up on a platform with a little microphone, and he would preach the gospel in the street. You know, it's like,
It's what the disciples were.
yeah,
We're
and
there
it,
to
you know,
do.
it was what he believed, in very radical kind of belief that his faith in God and the call of God on his life was so real that he overcame whatever, you know, other people might think, and he would stand out there and preach. Sometimes people would stop and they would listen. I don't know that we ever won any converts into the church from my father's preaching, but the Bible said don't worry about that.
Right.
You know, that's not your worry. Your worry is to be faithful to the call of God.
Exactly. I can't fault him for that.
No.
That's really what he believed, and who knows? I mean, I don't know what God has in mind for even myself, let alone somebody else. So.
And he was constantly, in his early years especially, my father was constantly evangelizing. The church was tiny, didn't make enough money to support the family, so he worked nights stocking shelves in the Acme markets. And he was there all night long. And he had a partner who worked nights with him, and that man was a troubled man. And my father believed that God had sent him to that man to preach the gospel to him and remind him of God's love. And it took a long time, but that man eventually came to believe. And so in my father's life, it was worth it all. It was worth everything, because he had been able to reach to a stranger, made the stranger a friend, and then invited that friend to become a friend of God in Jesus. Like, okay.
And maybe that's justification in itself. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
And maybe that's a kind of the same kind of work we do when we stand up, you know, we fight for justice, and we, you know, we witness to God's presence and love in the world in a way that wouldn't be seen if we don't point to it and we don't make it happen. I don't know.
It doesn't make it popular most of the time, but
Yeah, no. Especially when the systems of the world are pressing in the other direction.
exactly.
You know, I heard I'm not going to name who it is, but I heard one of the candidates running for the election next year was really bearing down on their philosophy about what is the political position. And it was shocking to me, because they said that the best and true pathway for government is to get out of the way of people, and that the government gets in the way, and that people should be allowed to do whatever they want to do. People should be free to do whatever they want to do, and that the government has positioned itself to get in the way of stopping people from doing what they want to do. And I think to myself, wow, is that what you believe? I mean, you really believe?
Is that what have they ever read the Constitution?
Yeah, no, they
That the
don't
government
care.
is
Like,
for the people, by the people, and of the people.
Yeah.
And that's what it's.
yeah, but that's the misnomer. That needs to be corrected, because the idea of the people.
New amendment.
Yeah, right. Like you can't stop people from doing what they want to do, because that's the human life. Now, what I find interesting is that the very same political platform swings around and says, but we can stop women from having abortions.
Exactly.
Right,
I don't
right.
get it. I don't get it. Agree or disagree, I just don't get it. I don't get how one follows from the other.
It doesn't. They've just chosen things they like and rejected all the rest. If
Yeah.
it's not going to benefit me, then, you know, I'm going to speak out against that. The rest of you be damned. I mean,
Yeah,
really?
I don't
It's
get
a
it.
selfishness. When you go into a democratic form of government, you know that not everything is going to be your way. And you just understand that when the majority of people want something, it gets legislated and it happens. And if you don't like it, you work within the law to change people's minds. It's messy, it takes a lot of time, but that's I've heard lately a lot of people saying, we need a strong man. Well, the strong man's going to say what the strong man wants, not what you want.
Right.
So,
But the hope is the strong man will be strong against the controls of government and beat government back out of our way. And you know, Ayn Rand is very popular without identifying Ayn Rand's philosophy. It's shocking, but Ayn Rand's philosophy is that selfishness is the highest moral.
right.
It is the greatest moral
Uber
achievement.
mentioned, like Nietzsche, or, you know,
Yeah,
it's like-
and the idea that charity, you know, Ayn Rand, who many politicians today read the book Atlas Shrugged and think it is the description of the pathway to the future. But in that description,
I'd argue that a
Yeah.
lot of them at maybe 10 or 15 years ago read Ayn Rand.
Right.
But the ones who are kind of going down that path don't read
Right.
anything.
Right.
So,
But they've still,
Yeah.
they've breathed in this atmosphere that says, the first shocking principle is that selfishness is the highest morality.
Right.
And the second shocking principle is that generosity and charity is foolishness. It is wasteful.
so I
It's-
don't understand how they can tie themselves to any church of any kind and still
Yeah.
be accepted by the church members
Well,
with
it's-
that kind of a philosophy.
It's a higher calling. It's like, yeah, Jesus was so yesterday. and now the new higher calling has arrived, and it's not new. It is not new.
No.
It is, you know, it's shocking in its application. But even when I was taking ethics classes in college, how many hundreds of years ago that was, but in ethics class, Dr. Trammell was explaining that there's a new philosophy, a new ethic, which is seeping into the culture of America, which is, I can do anything I want to do, anything, as long as, you know, the end of your nose is the beginning of, like, I'm not allowed to hurt you.
But that doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work at all, because,
Everything you do does affect everyone else.
that's right,
That's like, there's,
it's like that story, I forget where its origin is, that someone dropped a fork in England and caused an earthquake, you know, in China. And the interconnectedness of our human life is what's emerging. This is why contemporary political people do not like globalism. They don't like the shrinking backyard. They think that my backyard should be the limits of my freedom and I can do whatever I want and I'm not harming anybody.
Well, wake up was what you have then is chaos.
Yeah.
And is that what you want, really?
I don't think so. And I tell the story.
I'd rather sacrifice a little bit of personal freedom
Yeah.
for, you know, a world that actually is kind to, you know, where people help one another rather than put up a wall, you know. That is, Isaiah is writing, or whoever is writing in Isaiah's name, is writing against just that kind of
Yes.
attitude. How many years ago? So has human nature changed?
No.
Not too much, really. There's
No,
always
and so we reject this. We reject the idea of the suffering servant. We reject the idea that there may be some things, some suffering that I take on in my life on purpose. I still remember that, love him or hate him as a politician, Jimmy Carter got in front of the camera of America during a season of Christmas and pleaded with Americans to not put up Christmas lights. Do you remember that? And the reason was because there was, quote, a shortage of oil. There was no shortage. It was just that the OPEC alliances
had it wrapped up.
they were cutting our supply. But he believed there was a shortage. He thought we were running out of crude oil underground. And so he got in front of Americans and he said, it is American to sacrifice something
Oh,
for the good of all.
don't
He
tell
said that.
Americans that, though.
He said that.
That's like walking on the beach at the spring break. I mean, come on.
I mean,
who's gonna listen?
he was pleading with Americans to say, this is what America is. And he was hated as a politician on both parties in the end while he was in office because they rejected that.
Didn't they have a state dinner where he was dressed down? I mean, he had
Yes.
like a sweater on or
Right.
something.
And his whole thing was, you know, turn the heat down in your
Right,
house,
right.
make your house colder, embrace a little bit of discomfort for the well-being of the world's population.
He was too Christian.
He was too Christian. He was, and his wife was worse. You
All right.
know?
Yeah.
And so it's amazing that, he moves out of the political arena where he was seen as a buffoon. He was seen as a person who didn't know how to make the political structure happen.
Yeah.
I think he did. But then he gets out into the private sector, and all of a sudden he begins a life-changing, a world-changing way in terms of negotiations for peace, for struggling to see that housing problems can be solved, and that they can be solved by mutual cooperation.
I don't think he changed. I think
No,
the people
right.
that were watching him suddenly realized that that's probably a good way to be.
Yeah.
But at the time, it just didn't go. It
Well,
just
and
didn't work.
I still,
And
think,
also events happen that,
yes,
and you can't control.
but he didn't change.
No.
But people look at it now and go, well, that's a good way to be. Just don't be in politics. They
Right.
still don't want that. They still don't
Won't
want.
work.
Yeah, they don't want the government to be involved in that. I mean, because that's socialism. That's
Right.
what they think socialism is. And I don't know. How did I get on that rant?
Well, from Isaiah. Isaiah is, yeah, okay.
Hey, Isaiah holds up the virtue of suffering for something good.
Right. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go and try and figure out who he's talking about, or
Right.
it just get the message that you can do that. You can do that for the betterment of
For the good
your
of the world,
society.
that's right.
Yeah.
That your service, your self-sacrifice of your time or your money or your thoughts and your discipline, that it doesn't just benefit you, that it's vicarious, that it moves beyond you, it explodes the limits of who you are, and actually moves like ink in a glass of water out into the world.
And moves beyond time. That
Yes.
is just, it's contemporaneous. I mean, it's what we don't want to hear, but maybe it's better that we all hear it, because it should work.
Yeah.
It should work.
And I think instead of Isaiah talking about Jesus, he was not talking about Jesus. But what happens when you get to the New Testament is that Jesus' life embraces Isaiah.
Right. Yeah.
Jesus embraces Isaiah. Jesus says, yes, look there. That's the life.
He knew the scripture.
He did.
Yeah.
He knew the scriptures. And so, even as he goes in front of Pilate and he won't defend himself, he's exemplifying this act of God in history, which Isaiah described. There is benefit in not taking all you can get, in seeing the well-being of others. I also tell the story a lot, impressionable as I was as a young person, when my grandfather's farm, he had 3 farms, they were a working dairy farm, they generated all kinds of toxic waste. They didn't know it at the time, but the sprays they put on the crops and all the kinds of chemicals they used to kill flies in the barn, all of that stuff, we had a pile that was in the back of the barn, and it was stuff that you didn't want to burn because you didn't really know what effect it would have on you. So we would load it, maybe once every 3 weeks, we'd load up the wagon, and we put the tractor up to this big wagon, put everything in there, and we would go out to the furthest edge of the boundary of the farm,
And dump.
where there was a ravine,
Ooh.
and we would dump everything down in the ravine. Now, what's at the bottom of the ravine? A stream.
I was just going to say, or even if there weren't, when it rains, there's a stream.
It was a
Yeah.
stream, and it was a flowing stream.
Oh, boy.
So, I tell that story, actually I wrote that in one of my theological reflections to get into seminary, was to talk about how we have to understand, that didn't make my grandfather and my grandmother bad people.
No.
They didn't know.
Right.
They did not know, and they were simply following and doing what they felt they needed to do. But once they learned, they stopped.
Right. Like Barbara said, what you do affects everyone else around you.
Yeah, and they stopped. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of people, they didn't stop using the chemicals.
Oh.
And now Monsanto's paying the people that are still living from a lot of that. But they stopped. They heard the news that what they were doing was polluting the farms downstream, that, you know, there's all kinds of consequences for how you live on your little farm.
I think that the movie that makes people think about those kinds of things now has been this past season, Oppenheimer.
Yes.
Like what we have done
Oh.
and what the consequences of that means and has meant
Powerful.
for the earth. Yeah.
Powerful, powerful movie.
Changes whole governments and, you know, how people treat each other.
And there's a moment too in that movie where Oppenheimer's belief that he's creating something for strength and for betterment and for security, and then he realizes that there are people just 1 degree step back from him who are watching everything he does and learning everything he does for all the opposite reasons. For all the opposite reasons. For the enhancement of power over instead of defense from.
Yeah.
And isn't that the story?
It is.
Isn't that the story of we human beings here on the planet? I mean, it's just...
We make mistakes and sometimes we don't see it right away, but eventually, you know, the hope is that we do see our mistakes and fix them. How we do that once the bomb is there,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's tough.
I think a lot of times people feel that, you know, what difference is it going to make? I'm only one person. It's not, you know, so big deal. I do it, but we don't realize the consequences of everyone doing it. I did see, interesting that I read in when I was looking at stuff, that this verse is the best preserved of the biblical scrolls found at Qumran.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and also some of the meanings they were talking about was that it was not only possible as an individual, but also the nations, nation of Israel, but that this could be read, understood as the nation or the peoples of Israel. But I guess everyone looks at it because, as you said, Jesus, followed these guidelines that everyone looks at and says, "Oh, here's the prophet," knowing that this is what Jesus was going to do. Just did what we all should be doing.
Yeah, and it moves Jesus up as the primary actor rather than Jesus as the listener and the responder to the ancient text. And yet, throughout Jesus' life, he's always quoting. He's always quoting Isaiah. He's quoting the Hebrew scriptures. And even the New Testament writers refer back all the time to these same passages.
I think that's actually encouraging, because if you think of Jesus as God, then how do you live up to that? But if you think of Jesus as someone who's taken the scriptures and understands them and employs them in his life, and you think of Jesus as a man, well, then I can do that too.
Right.
I'm capable of doing the things that Jesus did. Then Jesus is a mentor. To me, it always felt like if Jesus is divine, then how do I relate to that?
Right.
But I can relate to a human being who's got more discernment, more insight than I have, and I'll follow that,
Well, that was, I always like to try to imagine the church council, where the divinity of Jesus was being argued. And there were clearly people at that conference who were arguing exactly what you argue. They were arguing that the full humanity of Jesus is the most important thing to hold on to for our human sake. And they were willing to surrender the idea of the divinity of God. When it happened, whatever, they were willing. Then there were others who said, no, it's got to be the other way, which is where you get this insane statement, about the Trinity. The Trinity is a compromise that was developed around the table among the people who said, if Jesus is anything more than a human being, we're toast.
Yeah.
Because We need to know in our humanness. And then the others who said, well, if Jesus wasn't God, then who made propitiation for our sins? And that couldn't be accomplished by a human being. It's got to be God. And then there were others who said, you guys were, you people are crazy. It was just the Spirit
So
of
we'll
God.
do a
that was
compromise. We'll have them half and half.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
they
so-
developed a Trinity compromise, which logically and in language, when you're talking about, well, was Jesus, God? You can say yes, but, so then the big, exception comes along. Oh, he was fully human. There was nothing about Jesus, humanity, that was affected in giving him any edge at all because of his divinity. Now, think about that, and that addresses your concern, and that is, no, he was fully human, no advantage, nothing, even though some of the gospel writers make him out to be a magician, and some of the gospel writers, he could seem to read people's minds. But even there is a sense in which if Jesus is not fully human, all human, then he's of no help to us. And he
It's just the
cannot-
opposite.
Yeah. And so in the council, 1/3 of the global Christian community said, we're holding on to the humanity of Jesus. You can figure out your divinity idea any way you want to. 1/3 of the global Christian community said, nope, this was God incarnate. This was God come down in the flesh. This was God at work and doing the work that's required of us. And then the other third, which became basically the Eastern Orthodox Church.
I was just going to say, aren't they
the
have a different idea?
Eastern Orthodox Church actually, in their minds, they won the argument because the two rationalists were holding on to their argument. Meanwhile, the mystics were going, we get this and you guys don't have a clue. This is never going to be argued out that way. So they had a big conference and they go, can we reach a compromise here? Can it be fully spiritual, God's presence in Jesus? Can it be fully human and accomplishing something for us as human beings? And can it also be fully divine, accomplishing something for the Godhead? And they all went, well, let's work out this language. Homoousion. It's three things, but made of the same substance. And you go, wait, could you run that by me again?
Right.
Could you? And then our good Jewish brothers and sisters go, you guys are polytheists.
Nuts.
You guys are polytheists.
And so
You've abandoned
that's what the Muslims feel.
The Muslims feel the same.
Exactly.
You guys have abandoned the monotheistic tradition, which is the central thing of what it means to be a follower of God. There is but one God. One God. And yet in the councils, they argued adamantly that they had not compromised to polytheism.
Well, it's this trouble of where do you put Jesus? I mean, isn't it more important rather than the person himself? It's more important at what he did and said, not can we call him God? Can we call him the Son of God? Can we call him a human? Can we call him a prophet? What did he say and do? Isn't that what we're really supposed to be paying attention to?
I guess, although many would argue no. There are very graphic illustrations of this, for the monotheists who said that Jesus was fully God. And, it comes down to very practical. Like, when Jesus died on the cross,
Who was he calling out
Who
to?
was in charge in heaven?
Who was he calling out to?
And the main theologies of the Trinitarians on that side were that when Jesus died, God died. That is the radical, unbelievable choice of God to lay down God's life. And then you realize how radical this is. And it wasn't God gave his only son. It was that God came into the world and died to make it right. So you don't have a God up there who's trying to be appeased, and that has never worked with me
That's
either.
fodder for atheists.
Yeah.
Come on, please.
So, there is a full tradition of the theists in that conversation who said, you are weakening the claim of what Christianity really is. We are monotheists. And the God of heaven and earth, who created the earth, made the incredible choice to become part of the created order. And as a result, suffered the death of the brokenness, but built into God is the resurrection, so that the resurrection occurred because God, the 1960s, God is dead. Well, God was dead for a couple of days, but now, and so this is what you do when you go to seminary.
Yeah, you argue about things that you can't prove, that you'll never know.
You play with all these
Saint
thoughts.
Dominic with the eye of how many angels and the eye of the
Yes.
needle or something.
And the reason that I value that I was exposed to all of that is because it causes me, as a pastor, to think through with people
Right.
their beliefs. And to say, okay, you really want to think, you really believe that? And what happens if you follow that line of thinking? Where do you end up? Do you really want to end up there? And so I find my opportunities here in Bible study, and I just felt, the window was open again for me in my mind last night to articulate how I read and understand the theology of the Bible. And that I know when I do that I'm speaking an edge out there. There are just, for 100 different reasons, people who will go, that's not what I believe. That is not what I believe. It's simpler than that. Again, go back to my ex-mother-in-law. You make Christianity very complicated.
It is.
Well,
Life is
it's like, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Right, that's a
my job.
compliment.
But wouldn't one of the things that I'm thinking in terms of Jesus had to be divine and God would be that if Jesus was human, that would mean that we could also do what he was doing. And people didn't want to feel, they wanted to say, well, we can't be like that. That was God doing it. So
Making
we
Jesus
can't
a scapegoat
create
again.
that.
I can't do that.
Whereas if you think of Jesus as a child of God and ourselves as children of God, that we can be, as Debbie said, Jesus was our mentor as to how to work it out.
Yeah. I mean, there are schools, full, complete schools of the gospel, even back in the first century, who said, Jesus is our example. There's hymns. There's hymns that celebrate Jesus is our great example. And that we are, and at some point, the New Testament writers remember Jesus saying to his disciples, you will do greater things than I do. You will receive power from God to do greater things than I do. People go, oh, well, we're not going to do healing. And then I go, really? I think we do healing now. You look around, the hospitals were motivated by the love of God for the world. And healing is actually taking place. And then, of course, Francis Coop always said, when he was Surgeon General, no one heals anyone. Healing takes place on its own. Doctors just make the way clear for healing to happen. But they do not understand, nor do they control healing. That is the work of God, always. And I go, okay, I can do that.
Get on board with that.
Can we do exorcisms? Can we release demons from people? Oh, yes, we can. I've seen it. Love sets the world free. That ministry that I worked in for a while with women who had been, predominantly women who had been raped by their families, in that ministry of trying to recover from incest, and that wise old doctor, pastor that was in charge of it said, you see these stories and you think, oh, that's hopeless. He said, you come walk with me for a while and let me show you what genuine love does. Genuine love does for people who have experienced not love from people who are supposed to love them. So if they experience genuine love from people who have no reason to love them, it is a complete healing that takes place. Yeah, okay, so we can
We're capable.
form exorcisms and healings, and we certainly can release the unjustly accused from jail. We're,
Oh, and that happens too.
yes.
What the world needs now is love.
Love.
Bert
Sweet
background,
love.
right.
Just love. Just
That's the
love.
only thing.
Yeah.
There's just too
Too
little love.
That would be too simple, right? But it isn't.
No, it's not. Nope. All right. Well, thank you for
Oh,
good discussion today. Thank
That
you
was-
for those of you who will watch, who are watching, maybe even live. I know many of you do not watch live, but by the end of this week, so this is Wednesday, by the end of this week, there will be 24
comments.
views,
Oh,
and many of them the entire conversation. So,
wow.
yeah.
Got to watch
So,
what we say.
That's right. Watch what you say, because even if you're not watching, we know the
Somebody
government's
is.
watching.
That's right.
They're
Santa
listening.
Claus is watching.
That's right. Be careful which buzzwords you say.
Oh,
Leave you when you're awake.
All right.
Here,
Take care, Barbara. Are you headed Saturday?
Monday.
Monday.
oh,
Okay.
Monday. So I thought
Yeah.
it was Sunday, so you might, well, we'll see what happens on Sunday.
Well,
You got the
keep your
snow
fingers
coming.
crossed. No snow.
Right. Okay. Bye now.
Take care. Bye.